February 3, 1942. Bataan Peninsula, Philippines. First Lieutenant Willibald Bianchi is leading men through jungle so thick you can see only 10 yards ahead. Two Japanese machine gun bullets punch through his left hand. He throws away his rifle, draws his pistol, and keeps advancing. Two more bullets tear through his chest muscles. Blood soaks his uniform. He climbs onto an American tank, grabs the anti-aircraft gun, and fires into the enemy position. Then a fifth bullet hits him at close range and throws him off the tank onto the ground. And this time, he does not get back up. This is the story of the man who earned the Medal of Honor in the first months of the war, survived the Bataan Death March, and died 3 years later when American planes bombed the unmarked Japanese ship he was imprisoned on. Willibald Charles Bianchi was born on March 12, 1915, in New Ulm, Minnesota, a rural town in the southwestern part of the state settled almost entirely by German immigrants. His family called him Bill. His parents, Joseph and Carolina Bianchi, were both first-generation German Americans who ran a large dairy and poultry farm. The operation was substantial. By 1930, the Bianchi farm and property were valued at $39,000, roughly equivalent to $3.5 million today. They employed a live-in housekeeper and a hired farmhand. Bill grew up working the land alongside his 4 sisters. In 1932, when Bill was 17, his father died. The teenager had to fill his father's void on the farm, managing a massive agricultural operation at an age when most boys were still in high school. But Bill had ambitions beyond the farm. By the late 1930s, the family had moved into New Ulm town proper. Bill worked as a janitor at a print shop to pay his way through South Dakota State Agricultural College. He graduated in 1940 with a bachelor's degree and a second lieutenant's commission through ROTC. After graduation, Bill spent time at a training camp, possibly in Florida. In a letter written in summer 1941, he mentioned meeting a nurse in Daytona. Then, in spring 1941, he received orders for the Philippines. He sent a postcard to his family from the ship. Dear Aunt and Uncle, traveling first class aboard the ship for Manila, Philippine Islands. Having a grand trip so far. Stopping 2 days in Hawaii. Say hello to Aunt Lizzie for me. Hope everybody is well. Willibald. In fall 1941, Bianchi was promoted to first lieutenant and assigned as commanding officer of Company D, 45th Infantry Regiment, Philippine Scouts. The Philippine Scouts were elite U.S. Army units composed primarily of Filipino enlisted men with American officers, highly trained, fiercely loyal, and about to face an enemy that would test them beyond anything they could imagine. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The next day, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines. World War II had begun. By late December 1941, American and Filipino forces were in full retreat. General Douglas MacArthur ordered all troops on the island of Luzon to withdraw to the Bataan Peninsula, a mountainous jungle region west of Manila. The plan was to hold Bataan until reinforcements arrived from the United States. But those reinforcements were never coming. The Japanese had destroyed the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The Philippines were surrounded, cut off, alone. In late January 1942, American forces established a defensive line across the middle of Bataan, stretching from the town of Bagak on the west coast to Orion on the east coast. It was roughly 10 miles long, cutting the peninsula in half like a belt. MacArthur declared this would be the last stand. No retreat. Fight to complete destruction. Bianchi and the 45th Infantry were held in reserve behind the line. The Japanese attacked fast. On the night of January 28th to 29th, approximately 2,000 Japanese soldiers broke through the American line on the western side near Bagak. They pushed deep into the jungle behind American positions, creating chaos. But instead of advancing further, they became trapped. American forces quickly sealed the breach, leaving the Japanese isolated in 3 defensive pockets about a mile behind the front lines. No supplies, no reinforcements, no way out. The Americans called them the Little Pocket, the Big Pocket, and the Upper Pocket. For days, American and Filipino forces tried to root out the Japanese, but the jungle was too thick for artillery. Visibility was 10 to 15 yards at best. Dense bamboo thickets, vines, and undergrowth made movement nearly impossible. The fighting had to be done hand to hand, trench to trench, nest to nest. The Japanese defended their positions with fanatical determination. Their military code forbade surrender. They would fight until they were all dead. On February 2nd, American commanders brought in 4 tanks to support an infantry assault on the Big Pocket. The tanks made some progress but lost 1 vehicle and failed to destroy the Japanese machine gun nests. The next day, February 3rd, a platoon from the 45th Infantry was ordered to wipe out 2 strong Japanese machine gun nests. Bianchi was not assigned to that platoon, but he volunteered to lead part of the men. The platoon moved through the jungle, rifles raised, listening for the sound of enemy fire. Visibility was almost zero. The undergrowth was so thick that Bianchi could see only 10 yards ahead. He was leading his men toward a known machine gun position when the first shots came. 2 bullets hit Bianchi in the left hand, tearing through flesh and bone. The pain was instant. His hand was useless. He could not hold his rifle. Most men would have stopped for first aid. Most men would have pulled back. Bianchi did not. He threw away his rifle, drew his pistol, and kept advancing. A pistol only requires 1 hand. He could still fight. He located the machine gun nest, pulled the pin on a grenade, and tossed it in. The explosion silenced the position. 1 nest down, 1 to go. Bianchi directed his platoon toward the second machine gun nest. The Japanese opened fire. Bullets ripped through the jungle. 2 more rounds hit Bianchi, this time through the chest muscles. Blood poured from the wounds. His breathing became labored, but he did not stop. He looked around for a way to destroy the nest. Then he saw it. An American tank, sitting nearby, unable to lower the muzzle of its 37mm gun enough to hit the low-lying target. Some sources say the tank had hit a landmine the day before and was disabled. Either way, the tank was there, and it had an anti-aircraft gun mounted on top. Despite the wounds in his left hand and his chest, Bianchi climbed onto the tank. He grabbed the anti-aircraft gun. He swung it toward the Japanese position, and he fired. The heavy rounds tore through the jungle, shredding the machine gun nest, silencing the enemy guns. Bianchi kept firing, pouring rounds into the Japanese positions, exposed on top of the tank, bleeding, refusing to stop. Then a bullet fired from close range struck him. The impact threw him completely off the tank. He hit the ground hard. This time the wound was serious. This time he did not get back up. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. Bianchi survived. Medics pulled him off the battlefield and transported him to a field hospital on Bataan. He spent more than a month recovering from the wounds. 2 bullets through the hand, 2 through the chest, 1 at close range that knocked him off a tank, 5 bullets, and he lived. While Bianchi was recovering, word of his actions on February 3rd reached General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur wrote the citation himself. When the rifle platoon of another company was ordered to wipe out 2 strong enemy machine gun nests, Lieutenant Bianchi voluntarily and of his own initiative advanced with the platoon, leading part of his men. When wounded early in the action by 2 bullets through the left hand, he did not stop for first aid but discarded his rifle and began firing a pistol. He located a machine gun nest and personally silenced it with grenades. When wounded the second time by 2 machine gun bullets through the chest muscles, First Lieutenant Bianchi climbed to the top of an American tank, manned its anti-aircraft machine gun, and fired into strongly held enemy position until knocked completely off the tank by a third severe wound. On March 5, 1942, just 1 month after the action, Bianchi was awarded the Medal of Honor. The medal citation was presented to him while he was still recovering in the hospital. He was the third serviceman fighting on Bataan to receive the nation's highest military honor, and he was only 26 years old. Bianchi's mother, Carolina, received word of her son's award back in New Ulm. She told a local newspaper, "He has always been a fighter." The town celebrated. Newspapers across Minnesota ran stories about the local farm boy who had become a hero. But Carolina would not receive the actual medal for 4 more years, and by then, her son would be dead. In March 1942, Bianchi returned to active duty with his unit. He had barely recovered from his wounds when the situation on Bataan collapsed. Food was running out. Ammunition was low. Medicine was gone. Thousands of men were sick with malaria, dysentery, and starvation. MacArthur had been ordered to evacuate to Australia, leaving behind over 70,000 American and Filipino troops. On April 9, 1942, those troops surrendered to the Japanese. Bianchi was now a prisoner of war. Along with the rest of the captured soldiers, he was forced onto what would become known as the Bataan Death March. 70,000 men, many of them sick and starving, forced to march 60 to 70 miles to prison camps in the north. The Japanese guards beat anyone who fell behind. They executed anyone who could not keep up. Thousands died on the march, but Bianchi survived. And not only did he survive, he helped others survive. Witnesses later reported that Bianchi moved up and down the line during the march, pushing men to keep going, urging them not to give up, because giving up meant death. He knew that if a man stopped, the guards would kill him. So he kept them moving, step by step, mile by mile. After the march, Bianchi was sent to Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1 in the central part of Luzon Island. Cabanatuan was a death trap, starvation rations, forced labor, disease, no medicine. Men died by the dozens every day. Bianchi was assigned to a burial detail. He buried as many as 40 men a day. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. For the next 9 months, Bianchi was listed as missing in action. His family had no idea if he was alive or dead. Then, in December 1942, the War Department notified his mother that her son was a prisoner of war. It was another 10 months before Carolina received word directly from Bill himself. A postcard-form letter, heavily censored by the Japanese, stating that he was in excellent condition. The postcards were propaganda. Every prisoner who filled one out was required to say they were in excellent health. The reality was the opposite. Bianchi was starving. He had been wounded in his right arm during the fighting, and his ulnar nerve had been severed. The nerve was slowly healing, but he had lost the ability to write for 2 years. He spent his time at Cabanatuan bartering for food, trying to keep his men alive, doing whatever he could to help. In October 1944, after nearly 2.5 years at Cabanatuan, Bianchi and 1,600 other prisoners were ordered to transfer to a work camp in mainland Japan. Before leaving, Bianchi wrote an uncensored letter to his mother and gave it to a friend who was staying behind. "Dear Mother, I am writing this letter in case the bearer, Captain Hans Hornbosel, has the opportunity to send it to you. We, the American prisoners here at Cabanatuan, will leave for Japan in a day or so. If we ever get their remains in God's hands, I am going to confession and communion just in case. We sure had a rugged time so far, and we all expect it to get worse before the end. Nearly all of us have become fatalists after going through what we have, but we are not complaining. You have to excuse this writing, but for 2 years I could not write at all. I was wounded in my right arm among other places. My ulnar nerve was severed. It is coming back slowly. I received 1 box and 1 letter from you. The letter had 25 pictures in it. A flight of American planes flew over the 21st of September. Sure put us in good spirits. The food here has been very scarce. Very little meat, most of the time none at all. No flour, grease, or medicine. Thousands have died. I used to be in charge of a burial detail. We buried as high as 40 a day. I am nearly out of ink, so we'll close hoping this letter will find you healthy and happy. You can use my back pay and insurance to make yourself happy and secure in your old age, in case I do not return. Your son, Willibald Bianchi. A few days later, Bianchi was loaded onto a truck and transported to Manila. After several weeks in a prison in the city, more than 1,600 American prisoners of war were packed into the cargo hold of a Japanese transport ship called the Oryokumaru. The ship sailed from Manila in mid-December 1944. The prisoners were crammed into the hold with no ventilation, no food, and no water. Men began dying within hours. On December 15th, an American plane bombed and sank the unmarked ship just off the Philippine coast. Most of the prisoners, including Bianchi, were able to swim to shore. The Japanese then loaded the survivors onto two smaller transport ships and sailed to Takao, Formosa, which is present-day Taiwan. In Formosa, all the prisoners were transferred to another ship, the Inura Maru. They waited in the ship's hold for 2 weeks. Little food, poor ventilation, horribly unsanitary conditions. Men were dying every day. On January 9, 1945, an American plane flew over Takao Harbor. The pilot saw a Japanese transport ship docked in the harbor. The ship was unmarked. The pilot had no way of knowing that the cargo holds were filled with American prisoners of war. He dropped a 1,000-pound bomb on the ship. The bomb exploded in the hold where Bianchi was imprisoned. Bianchi was killed instantly. He was 29 years old. Approximately 300 to 500 American prisoners of war died in the bombing. 2 days later, the Japanese loaded the remains of the dead onto barges and took them ashore at Takao, where they were buried in mass graves. Let us put this story in context. The Battle of Bataan lasted from January 7th to April 9th, 1942. Over 70,000 American and Filipino troops surrendered, the largest surrender in American military history. Of those, approximately 10,000 died on the Bataan Death March. Another 20,000 died in Japanese prisoner of war camps over the next 3 years. The mortality rate for American prisoners held by the Japanese was 40%. For every 10 men captured, 4 died in captivity. Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1 held over 8,000 prisoners at its peak. Thousands died there from starvation, disease, and brutality. Bianchi was in charge of a burial detail that buried as many as 40 men a day. That means on some days, 1 out of every 200 prisoners in the camp died. In a single day. The Oryokumaru and Inura Maru were part of what prisoners called the Hellships, unmarked Japanese transport vessels used to move prisoners from the Philippines to Japan. The ships were targets for American planes because they looked like ordinary enemy transports. The prisoners had no way to signal that they were inside. Between December 1944 and January 1945, over 1,600 American prisoners of war were loaded onto the Hellships. Only about 450 survived the journey. The rest died from bombing, starvation, disease, or execution. The mass grave at Takao contained the remains of 483 American prisoners of war killed in the Inura Maru bombing. After the war, in 1946, the U.S. Army Quartermaster General exhumed the mass grave. But the remains were so intermixed that individual identification was impossible. The remains were eventually interred in 20 communal graves at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii, also known as the Punch Bowl. For 80 years, Willibald Bianchi's remains were classified as non-recoverable. His official status was missing in action. His name appeared on the tablets of the missing at Manila American Cemetery. In 1976, the Punch Bowl erected a cenotaph, a memorial grave marker placed on a grave containing no body in his honor. In May 1946, more than 4 years after Bianchi first received the Medal of Honor citation, and nearly a year and a half after his death, his Medal of Honor was presented posthumously to his mother at Fort Snelling, Minnesota. Carolina Bianchi accepted the medal on behalf of her son. Today, the medal is located at the Brown County Historical Society Museum in New Ulm, Minnesota. Then, on August 11, 2025, the Department of Defense announced that it had positively identified the remains of Captain Willibald Bianchi. The Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, the Pentagon agency tasked with identifying those lost in combat, successfully identified Bianchi using modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced that Bianchi's remains would be transported to Minnesota for a proper burial. 600 families had claimed that missing soldiers from the Philippines might be their relatives. 600 families who had waited decades for answers. Bianchi's family was one of them, and after 80 years, they finally got those answers. The story of Willibald Bianchi is about the cost of war, not just the cost measured in battles won or lost, but the cost measured in individual lives. Bianchi earned the Medal of Honor in the first months of the war. He was a hero. He had done everything his country asked of him. He had fought when wounded. He had led men under fire. He had refused to give up. And then he spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. 3 years of starvation, disease, and brutality. 3 years of burying his men 40 at a time. 3 years of watching his fellow soldiers die from conditions that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with cruelty and neglect. And at the end of those 3 years, he was killed by his own side. An American pilot flying an American plane, dropping an American bomb on a Japanese ship that held American prisoners. The pilot did not know. He could not have known. The ship was unmarked. There was no way to tell that the hold was filled with prisoners of war. But that does not change the fact that Willibald Bianchi survived 5 Japanese bullets, the Bataan Death March, and 3 years in Japanese prison camps, only to die from friendly fire 6 months before the war ended. The story also highlights the extraordinary bravery of prisoners who helped each other survive. Bianchi moved up and down the death march, pushing men to keep going. He bartered for food in Cabanatuan, trying to keep his soldiers alive. He led burial details, giving dignity to the dead. He did not have to do any of those things. He could have focused on his own survival, but he did not. He kept leading. He kept helping. He kept being the officer his men needed. 80 years later, his remains were finally identified. 80 years of being listed as missing in action. 80 years of his family not knowing where he was buried. 80 years of waiting. The identification was a miracle of modern science, but it was also a reminder of how many others are still missing, how many families are still waiting, how many names are still on the tablets of the missing. Willibald Bianchi earned the Medal of Honor at 26. He died at 29. 3 years of war, 3 years of captivity, and 80 years before he could finally come home.